Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Erik Brynjolfsson, who is a professor of management at the MIT Sloan School of Management. He's the director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, and he is the co-author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling book called The Second Machine Age: Work, Progress, and Prosperity in a Time of Brilliant Technologies. Erik, a real pleasure to have you.
It's great to be with you, Doug.
So let's get a little summary here. What is the second machine age all about?
Well, we call it the second machine age specifically to compare and contrast it with the first machine age, or the Industrial Revolution. You know, that was really the big turning point in human history when living standards started to rise and wealth grew astronomically. We're at least 100 times wealthier than our ancestors 200 years ago when the steam engine was first developed, in Scotland, by the way. And now we are automating not our muscles like those earlier technologies did, but we're augmenting our brains with computers, software, big data. And Andy McAfee and I are convinced that the second machine age will be at least as big an impact as the first machine age, the Industrial Revolution.
So the Industrial Revolution seemed to be a pretty positive thing for all of mankind. Do you see that the same way here, or is there something more nefarious going on?
Well, there are definitely some similarities. I think both of them are going to dramatically increase wealth and productivity, make the pie bigger. In the first machine age, automating muscle work made human brains more valuable. You needed an engineer to drive the train, or a manager to manage the factory, or a human to drive the car. In the second machine age, as we start automating and augmenting minds, it's not as clear where the role of humans will be. There's still things in the emotional realm and interpersonal realm where we have a big edge, but the space for where we differentiate ourselves from machines is getting narrower. And one of the things we're seeing is that wages for the median worker, for average workers in a lot of advanced countries, have been falling for about 15 or 20 years. And one of the reasons is because those kinds of jobs are increasingly automated by machines. So even as the pie is getting bigger, there's no economic law that says everyone is going to participate in that. Some people, potentially even a majority of people, could be made worse off if we don't manage it correctly.
Well, one of the things that maybe a lot of people feel today, and I can even tell you just as a father, and I compare how my kids interact to when I was in high school, I feel that the next generation is kind of integrating itself with the machines, that it becomes really part and parcel of who they are, as opposed to the machines being a tool. Now, I'm kind of against it because I kind of wonder why my kids sit around and text each other instead of talking to each other. But is that the direction that we're moving?
In some ways, absolutely. We're seeing machines, in our book, we talk about racing with the machines and using them to augment our skills, as opposed to racing against the machines and competing with them. And I think that the more we can use them to augment and improve our skills, the better off we'll be as individuals and as a society. So I would encourage your kids to learn how these machines and technologies can allow them to do things they never could have before. We see that in literal ways, like machines augmenting our limbs and muscles. My colleague Hugh Hare has a number of prosthetic technologies that help let people walk or use their hands who otherwise wouldn't be able to, or even vision and hearing systems. But the bigger changes are in augmenting our brains, allowing us to solve problems we couldn't have solved before.
Huh. So the inventions like Google's driverless car or robots that are using artificial intelligence, they're able to do the jobs that really a lot of us are used to. And it's becoming a little bit more science fiction-like in a way that it's a little bit scary. And I'll leave this for the last question on the topic, but is there something that we need to really be afraid of the machines?
Well, that's a great question, Doug. I think that these technologies are changing much more rapidly than a lot of us predicted. I have to confess that I was taken off guard by how quickly Google's driverless car came on the scene, and when Andy and I got to ride it, we were thrilled with its safety and potential. Are there some dangers? I think there are. It's good that we have this additional wealth. I'm less worried about sort of the Terminator scenario where the machines turn on us. I'm more worried that we won't manage the transition well, that as the machines automate a lot of work, that some people could be thrown out of work and become unemployed. And we need to find new things for them to do, or new ways for them to to earn a living, or at least share in the bounty. And we're not doing a very good job of that right now. And there are people who are getting upset about that. In America, there's the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. I saw people throwing rocks at Google buses. And when big chunks of society aren't participating in the growing bounty, they're going to get angry. And I think in a way they have a right to get angry. And we need to not only develop amazing technologies, but also reinvent our organizations, our skills, our institutions, so that we can create shared prosperity. And that's, if we don't do that, I think there's a real risk of this thing blowing up in a bad way.
We're speaking with Erik Brynjolfsson, who's a professor at MIT, and he is the co-author of a book called The Second Machine Age. He's been talking to us kind of about the image of what we might be seeing in the future as technology is growing so rapidly. And maybe he's trying to make us feel not so afraid about what will happen. But if I'm going to advise my kids about what they should be studying, what should they be preparing for and preparing themselves so that they can actually participate in the future instead of just being one of the folks left on the side?
Well, that's a really important question. I'm glad you asked that, Doug, because I think we all need to be asking ourselves that, and our kids should be asking that. The short answer is you want to be able to do things that machines don't do well. And what that means is that there are areas involving creativity and insight in arts and sciences and entrepreneurship that machines are still very bad at. A lot of them require, special intellectual talents, and we've heard about superstars making big incomes doing that. But it's not just that. There's another big category, which is, I'd call it emotional intelligence, things like interpersonal skills. So, nurturing people, coaching people, motivating people. I think most of us wouldn't get all that motivated if we had a robot coach at halftime at a football game try and encourage us, or for that matter, a robot manager or leader telling us that we're doing a good job. So humans are particularly good at those kind of interpersonal connections, and whether that's a nurse's aide or a manager or a salesperson, that's an area where we can strengthen. And then the third area, which is a little surprising perhaps to some people, are just basic fine motor skills and mobility. So today, hairdressers, gardeners, cooks, even janitors have not seen their jobs automated to a great extent because machines just aren't good at that kind of dexterity. Those aren't necessarily the highest paid jobs, but they're often ways of combining dexterity with interpersonal skills and even creativity, all three of those, to create a package that is very hard for a machine, at least with current technology, to compete with.
Okay, so I'm trying to imagine the future world that you're describing, and with all due respect, it sounds a little strange to me. First of all, I think the answer for the hairdressers and the cooks and janitors is because those are such low-paying jobs that at this point there's no incentive to really develop machines to do that. Although I have to say, my favorite home appliance is my Roomba that vacuums the floor. And it saves us hours. I think it's a phenomenal choice. And as far as the creativity and the interpersonal skills, which I think are great, I feel the opposite. I feel that people are losing the ability to communicate with each other rather than spending the free time they have to develop it. It's not like we're in some kind of renaissance. Maybe you feel it differently, but I don't feel the renaissance happening where people are out there writing poetry and music on the one hand, and other people are appreciating it to the point where they'd be willing to pay for it.
Well, I have to disagree with you on that. There's never been as many YouTube videos as there are now, or songs written or apps written. People are writing blog posts and, radio podcasts for free and communicating with each other in a way that they never did before. So, maybe some of that content is dreck and you're not that excited by it. But, there are people who look down on William Shakespeare, and I'm sure Aristotle as well in their day. It may be hard for us to know which of these types of content are going to be the really successful ones in the future. And even when somebody posts the pictures of their grandkids on Facebook, and an uncle or an aunt gets to watch them, that's a little bit of content creation that we now, in my view, allows people to be more in touch than they were before. So I have a somewhat more optimistic view of it, and I think we are actually tending towards a society where we're going to have more leisure time, less of the routine work, because that's going to be increasingly automated, and people will spend more time, doing different kinds of games and sports and arts, maybe not high art, but different kinds of things that entertain them. In the limit, when robots get really, really good, I think that food, clothing, housing, those kinds of things will be created by machines primarily, and humans will do the interpersonal interaction that, from a very basic level, is something that we get enjoyment from.
All right, let's wrap up by figuring about how far in the future are we talking until we're living in this kind of Jetsons world?
Well, I don't think it's a zero, a black and white thing that suddenly happens. One day we turn around. It's going to happen in an evolutionary way. Even the self-driving car, it's not, as I wrote in, I realized it's not a matter of is the car self-driving or not. It's a matter of which conditions can it drive under and which can't. By 2017, General Motors will have a car that drives on highways, super cruise control, but it may be 10 or 15 years or more before you start seeing them in city traffic, especially a city like Boston or Jerusalem, where the traffic can be a little crazy at times. So we'll be continuing kind of progressing step by step. I don't really see a single point in time, a so-called singularity, where it all suddenly changes. I think that there will be areas where, 10 or 20 years from now, the world will be very different from what it is today, and there'll be other areas where it hasn't changed too much.
All right, so we should agree to meet back here in, let's say, 5 and 10 years and see what the changes are, and we'll see which way the predictions are going.
I'd be delighted.
We've been talking to Erik Brynjolfsson, who is a professor at MIT. Erik, in the last few seconds, just tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Well, I'd be delighted if they, came to my website. There's a lot of free information there. If you Google the word Brynjolfsson or MIT initiative on the digital economy, you'll get access to those websites. We have a lot of free papers there. Of course, one of my favorite ways would be if you picked up a copy of my book with Andrew McAfee, The Second Machine Age, where we describe our vision in much more detail.
Okay, and we will put links to all of that at the show notes of goldsteinongelt.com. Erik, thanks again so much for your time.
Real pleasure, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.